This is Terms of Reference. I'm your host, Stephen Laddick. As any Aidpreneur will readily tell you, putting together even the most simple service or product to help those in need becomes an all-consuming affair rather quickly. That is, if you want to actually get it on the street, refine, grow, scale, and have a sense of sustainability that can see beyond the next payroll cycle. Then, if you add in the need to measure impact and managing or marketing real human behavior change while satisfying the needs of government or private donors, well, you see where I'm going. All of this is to say that it is the exceptionally rare bird who can do all of this alone. In fact, I honestly don't know of anyone who has. No matter our level of genius, we all have a network of support we call upon to breathe life into our projects and ideas and companies and help them grow from seed to oak tree. Randall Kempner, my guest on the 121st episode of the Terms of Reference podcast, knows and preaches this every day. He is the executive director of the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, or ANDE, a global membership network of organizations that seek to propel entrepreneurship in emerging markets by providing critical financial, educational, and business support services to small and growing businesses. Randall's got 20 years of experience in the field of international economic development. And most recently, he served as vice president for regional innovation at the U.S. Council on Competitiveness, and prior to that, was a founder of OTF Group. I spoke with Randall in Washington, D.C. And hey there, before we dive into the episode, if you like what you're hearing, take a moment to open up iTunes or whatever your podcast app happens to be and click on subscribe. Also consider giving the show a rating because it really does help us get the word out. And finally, please consider sharing this episode or the podcast on Facebook or Twitter to help others get in on making aid and development better. Thanks, and here's the show with Randall. Hello, Randall. Thank you so much for being on the Terms of Reference podcast today.
Stephen, it's great to be here.
Randall, you are a man of the world. Where do we find you sitting today?
Today, I am happily ensconced in my office in DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C., looking at a very, very bright sun.
Oh, I'm a little jealous. I got to admit, I am an old school DuPonter from back in the day myself. And, we're recording this in early September 2016, so I imagine the air is getting a little crisper. You're maybe feeling fall coming your way a bit, or...
You would imagine that, except that we are what we hope is in the last week of the summer heat wave. We're expecting highs in the upper 90s today in Washington.
Oh, that's right. Global warming's a thing. I forgot. Sorry.
It does not feel like fall yet. Not actually at all. But there is some hope on the horizon. I think it's going to start hitting next week.
Yeah, excellent. So you're the director of the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. Most people know it as ANDE. Why don't we just start by you telling us about that organization and what you do?
So ANDE, you're right, as what we like to call it, has been around for about 7 years. We launched in 2009. And the vision of ANDE is to create a network of organizations and help this network to thrive as we as a group try to promote small business entrepreneurship in emerging markets. Basic idea is that we want to create a movement like microfinance, but aimed at the next level up. So we want to help businesses that have at least 5 employees that are seeking capital, growth capital between $20,000 and $2 million in emerging markets. And we want to help these companies because we think that they are a critical tool in building prosperity for poor people in developing countries. It's these firms that can create jobs and address social and environmental problems. And we feel like broadly entrepreneurship like this is not being leveraged fully as a development strategy.
I've heard people talk about this before. Would I be wrong in characterizing this as middle market or pre-middle market companies?
Well, so we use the term small and growing businesses, and so SGBs. We did the cardinal sin that happens every day here in Washington and created a new acronym. But we did so intentionally, because what we're really trying to do is find the sub-segment of small and medium enterprises, which is the standard term of art, that is led by growth-oriented managers. We're trying to find the 5% or the 10% of those businesses that truly have the potential to grow and create jobs, and in many cases are already focused on addressing social and environmental challenges. And so, we use the term SGBs. One of the other things you do here, which I think is appropriate to describe the segment that we're focused on, is the so-called missing middle. So these are businesses that have a really hard time in accessing finance in developed, but in particularly in developing countries. Kind of a big gap in global finance, which I can describe in more detail, but we are trying to work with those firms in the missing middle.
So tell me about who we is. Are you a funder? Are you providing technical support? What's the mechanism for how this actually works?
So Andy members represent the full global ecosystem of players that are relevant to supporting entrepreneurship in developing countries. So that includes development agencies, corporations, foundations, universities, investment funds, banks, capacity development providers, consulting firms, and research institutions that care about this space. Entrepreneurial support organizations that come together because they want to learn from each other and they want to be part of a broader movement to promote entrepreneurship as a development strategy in developing countries. So we, as Andy, operate kind of like any industry association. Any industry association, whether it's Andy or the American Coffee Mug Association, as I look at what's in front of me, would do too big. They have programs and services to help their members do their jobs better, and they try to grow the industry. And we're the same way. I'm happy to dive into some of the details.
Yeah, so the difference in my mind is that, if you're looking at like the grain industry or the milk association, the meat association, there are verticals that, they're all talking about the same conversation, whereas you have this real diverse group of organizations that could be going in lots of different directions. So how do you lasso them all together?
We like to say our job is a little bit harder than most industry associations because of the diversity of members. But, they do all share this belief that supporting entrepreneurship is a positive thing. Now, that could be held equally by Coca-Cola and Nestle and Citibank, who are all members, as well as Vilgro and Dasra and Intellicap, which are all groups in India that promote capacity development, in some cases investment into small businesses, or Stanford or Pan Atlantic University in Lagos or Duke, which all have programs that promote training and knowledge sharing around entrepreneurship. So our goal and our challenge is to bring together organizations of different sizes with different geographic foci, with different assets, but to try to find the parts of those organizations that are relevant to this overall vision and make sure that those individuals and groups within the larger organizations are getting access to knowledge sharing opportunities, getting access to training opportunities, getting access to our work in promoting high quality and consistent impact measurement. And so that's where the challenge comes in. And yes, it can be daunting, but fundamentally every member wants one or two of the same things, which is they want to do their jobs better and they want to be part of a larger group that's trying to promote something they care about. So we actually find more commonality than difference, at least with the people that we work with.
Tell me what a specific event would look like. Is it virtual? Are you bringing people together? Do you having a specific event in Bangalore or Delhi or Kuala Lumpur or whatever? Give us an example of what that is.
Yeah, let me give you the longer answer to that question, and then I'll dive into a couple details for you. So the way Andy is structured is that we are based in Washington, D.C., but we are truly a global organization. And what I think makes Andy special is not the fact that we happen to have offices in DuPont Circle, but the fact that we have 7 regional chapters, 3 in Africa, 2 in Latin America, 1 in India, and an emerging chapter in Southeast Asia. And for 6 of those 7, excluding Southeast Asia, we actually have full-time staff. Now in each of these places, we have at least 2 people working, where they bring together our members who are working in those developing countries so that they can have an experience of coming together and working on whatever they think is relevant for that particular market. And so to give you an example, just today in East Africa in Nairobi, in that chapter, we as Andy have put together a career fair that is aimed at trying to attract young professionals to participate either as employees of entrepreneurial support organizations, so our members, or more importantly, to expose them to opportunities that might exist within small and or social enterprises in East Africa. And one of the big challenges, I think, frankly, the biggest challenge that faces most small and growing businesses in emerging markets is access to mid and senior level talent, access to and the ability to maintain them as employees given all the other options that they have. So the issue of talent and trying to help both our members and, more importantly, the companies they work with to access, to develop and retain that talent is something that's very important to Andy. So today in Nairobi, there are a whole bunch of Andy members that are on a college campus talking about what they do. A number of their investee companies are there talking about what they do. And I haven't seen the numbers yet. I've seen some initial pictures, but it looks like hundreds of young professionals, many of whom are students, are learning about this opportunity. That's one example of what Andy does. On the other end, we do have our annual conference. It's in September of this year, so coming up. And at the annual conference, it's just an extraordinary opportunity to get people, typically from 40 or 50 countries, coming together to learn about what works and what doesn't in all sorts of different realms relevant to supporting small business entrepreneurs. So we'll have conversations about women's entrepreneurship, youth entrepreneurship, financial tools to support entrepreneurs, the legal structures that make the most sense to help entrepreneurs in terms of both the structure of the company and the structure of the investment vehicles that might be investing into those companies. We have an amazing opportunity. We're big fans of speed networking, so speed dating. And I'll pause and tell you a story. The first year we did our annual conference, we actually paid someone to do this massive algorithm to try to get matches between people to make sure that we were networking them in the right way. And it was incredibly difficult to create the algorithm. And in the end, people are like, yeah, I still kind of met some interesting people, some not. And the next year I just said, you know what, to heck with this. We're not going to spend any money to build an algorithm. We're going to throw these fascinating people in a room randomly and see what happens. And people loved it. So we recognize the power both of formal interactive opportunities like conferences and events like the Career Fair. We have learning labs that take place at both virtually at a global level, and then we have regional versions of them when they're meeting to talk about.
And do you think that these people, in some cases, I'm just sort of hearkening back to the fact, entrepreneurship is in your name. It's it's what we're talking about here. Do these people self-select? Are they showing up to these things because that's who they are? Do you attract a certain personality in general?
Yeah, I guess I do, in the sense that that the typical Andy or active Andy member, that individual is someone who is passionate, who typically is entrepreneurial, who is open to new ideas, and who likes to have fun. So, I say that because I love my job because I get to work with those kinds of people all the time. And, they may work in institutions that have been around for hundreds of years or may be quite bureaucratic, but the people that we tend to attract within those institutions to Andy convenings, the Andy activities, are the people that do want to break a few eggs and are the people that are going to be inspirational to me and to the folks that I get to work with.
So what's your go-to story for, either an Andy member or someone who's been helped by the network, who's graduated from the process, something that, when you're having a beer with somebody, it's your go-to story that you always kind of pull out of your back pocket?
The honest answer is I tend to try to use lots of different stories and examples, and it sort of depends upon what they're asking for. But let me try to give you one example. I'll tell you, when I was looking at this job, one of the companies that truly inspired me was Root Capital. It is an investment fund based in Boston, run by a really great guy named Willie Foote, who has served on the Andy Executive Committee since our founding. So I remember when I was doing research to interview for this job, just being struck by how cool the model that they had developed is. And what Root Capital does is they work with typically agricultural cooperatives in developing countries to help them find buyers on the global markets and also work with them to make sure that the quality of their product is good enough to be sold to these buyers. And then they do kind of a triangular deal where, because often these buyers wouldn't have faith in a farmer cooperative to be a direct supplier, that Root Capital actually lends money to the farmer cooperative to make sure that the product is produced, and then upon delivery of that product to the larger company, that company then pays directly to Root Capital. So the risk associated with not being repaid goes down for Root Capital because ultimately at least one form of their deal, the client is, a big agricultural company. So one example, just to put on this, was their, Colombia, they're working with groups that created peppers that they sold to McElhaney Company that makes Tabasco sauce. Right? So Root Capital was the group in the middle that was making sure the finance and technical assistance flowed to the farmer cooperative, and found McElhaney Company to be the buyer. And I was like, wow, that just makes a lot of sense, given the potential risks that are involved. Having someone in the middle that actually provide both the financial acumen as well as understand and be able to work with often less educated, certainly less connected entities in emerging markets. It's like, I just think that's really cool. Mm-hmm. And so that's one example of an organization that's been around for a long time, that's clearly seen as a success in the field.
Why don't we use this as an opportunity to circle back on that, one of those issues that you identified, the financing gap that you see is apparent in the marketplace right now. Is this something that traditional finance providers are recognizing? Is it something that your network's addressing? So how's it playing out, and what do you see being the disruptor in the future?
Yeah, so it's a massive gap. And McKinsey and the IFC came out with a report a few years ago now that talked about, for formal small and medium enterprises in emerging markets, that the credit gap, and that's just looking at access to debt, to credit from banks, loans, et cetera, was between $700 and $850 billion on a global basis, or global emerging market basis. And so we do think that's a massive issue. And we think that some of it can be solved, we hope, by innovative financial tools like impact investing and the rise not only of sort of more traditional investing with an impact perspective, but also with the recognition that you do need some innovative financial tools like royalty-based finance, which is not straight equity or straight debt, that is more appropriate for investment deals where you don't want to wait a long time to get some sort of repayment, but you also don't want to burden these small businesses with consistent annual debt payments that often are more than they can handle. So, without going into maybe the gory details, the basic point is we think there is innovation happening, and there even more needs to happen in the way that banks and other financial institutions can provide funding to these small businesses. And we're excited by what we're seeing. But what I would say, which is different than happened in microfinance, is that we haven't found yet this kind of big breakthrough technology or business model like cross-collateralization was for microfinance. We haven't found that yet in SGB finance. And I am not sure that there is going to be one big...
I was just going to say that, do you have a think tank, or are there specific organizations within Andy that are working on that problem?
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of our members that are thinking about, well, what's the most effective way of providing typically investment funding, so something that is more like equity, and sometimes they're thinking about that as well. The bank members certainly are. So yes, and we have a whole working group or learning lab dedicated to capital aggregation and thinking about how blended finance can work, and thinking about how investment structures and deal structures can be more felicitous toward long-term support of these companies, and ideally could be models that are scalable. But we're still in the exploration phase for most of these, and I think that, frankly, the different types of businesses that are represented by SGBs, so a farmer cooperative looks a lot different than a startup software company, means that there's not going to be one type of financial innovation that solves all the problems. Mm-hmm. It's just too heterogeneous. So I would love for that to be the case, that there's one big aha moment, but I think realistically we're talking about multiple small innovations that need to be applied in different ways in different geographies.
For lack of a better term, an ecosystem, right?
Yeah. Let me do just a thought experiment with you, which I think is fun. If I ask you to go back 30 years and say, you're in DuPont Circle maybe 30 years ago, thinking about development, and we're sitting around, we're having a coffee, and I say, all right, which of these things are we going to be able to figure out in the next 30 years? Are we going to be able to figure out how to get billions of dollars of new loans to illiterate women in countries that don't typically value women's economic contributions? so that they can start a business? Or are we going to figure out how to get new billions of dollars of loans to existing businesses with at least 5 employees and experienced management that we know wants to grow the company? What would you say, Stephen?
30 years ago? Neither of those really sound possible, right? But if I were to think about it, I think that you'd probably put the money through traditional development organizations that actually have access to women on the ground and know the people and can actually put the cash in the hands of people who can really use it. But that's the way that I would think about it.
This may be that you know too much, because I think what most people would say is there's no way in heck. The idea just wasn't. It's not plausible that you would take people who don't know how to read and don't have any business acumen, figure out a way to get them funding versus existing businesses.
Sure, of course. Now that I sort of see where you're going with that thought experiment, I'm definitely a poor audience for that. Just I've been around the business too long. I'm tainted, right?
So no worries. It works a lot with people who are not development experts. And the reality is there were some extraordinary innovations and some amazing work that was done by the leaders of the microfinance movement to create a multi-billion-dollar industry out of nothing. And we would love to find a way to emulate that, but it comes back to the fact that while certainly not all microfinance borrowers are the same, the commonalities of those microfinance borrowers was much greater than the heterogeneity that we see across the different types of businesses and the different geographies that we as a sector are trying to support as we think about small and growing businesses in developing countries.
What's evolved for Andy over the last 7 years? I don't think that you have been the executive director the whole time. Is there a new way that you're connecting people? Is there new frontiers that you're investigating about how to connect members to the businesses you're supporting, or what's changed over that time?
So I am the only executive director of Andy. I've been here since the beginning.
Oh, sorry. When you were characterizing earlier about how you applied for it, I thought you took over from somebody else in the organization.
No. I was fortunate that the first person they found when they went out looking for an executive director. I can't take credit for founding Andy, but I can take credit or blame for growing it since. To answer your question, over the last 7 years, I don't feel like we've come to a conclusion that there are certain models that always work better than others. There are some exciting types of finance. Broadly, the idea that impact investing could be an important tool that is, started a little before 7 years ago, but I think we could certainly say today that the opportunity around impact investing and trying to drive significant amounts of capital to emerging market SGBs that is motivated by both a financial and a social return, that's real. It's not happening with as much quantity as we would like at this moment, but I think there's a real opportunity there, and certainly I am a big advocate for that, and try to convince folks to think that way and with their investment dollars. So that maybe that's one example, that's a reasonable approach that can be taken in a general sense.
Well, before you go further, there's probably a lot of people who are listening to this who don't understand what impact investing is. So can you give us a quick breakdown between the difference between impact investing and just regular investing?
Sure, happy to do that. So impact investing is defined as an investment which is made with the intention of having both a financial and a social or environmental impact. And the big difference is, while any investment could theoretically have an impact that is positive socially, they are typically not made with that intention. A traditional investment is made with the intention of hitting some financial goal solely. Whereas an impact investment says, no, part of the intention of me saying I want to put $100 in this loan fund is that I will get that money back at a certain interest rate, and I will be doing something to make the world a better place. And over the past 10 years, there have been an explosion of impact investing funds and impact investing vehicles that try to reflect what I'm happy to say is a growing concern by much of the world in making sure that our financial assets are being used in the most productive way possible.
So have you seen over the last 7 years the profile of either Andy member or the people who are in the network that are, supporting businesses? Are they describing themselves more as social entrepreneurs or social impact investors, or is it remaining essentially commercial organizations or traditional organizations?
No, and again, just to clarify, so the Andy members, the entrepreneurial support organizations that Andy as a network supports, I would say they definitely are seeing more and are more interested in social entrepreneurs than they would have been 10 years ago. Indeed, about 75 to 80% of the members of Andy would explicitly classify themselves as being supporters of either impact investing, so the supply side of the money, or social entrepreneurship, the demand side. And broadly, we are one of a number of organizations that are promoting social entrepreneurship as a very positive tool, though there are a number of Andy members who would say, let's not worry about whether we call it social or not. What matters most is that we're getting support to entrepreneurs who can create jobs, and that in and of itself is a social good, particularly in emerging market contexts where there is a big paucity of jobs. So that's a little bit of the Andy description. Fundamental question, is social entrepreneurship growing as a trend and as a tool? Absolutely.
So right there, you talked about partnership, and I wanted to go down that path for a second. Is how does Andy partner with other organizations that support social entrepreneurship? Do you bring them into the network, or do you find specific ways to partner with, or how does that work?
So we view ourselves as not the only, but an important player in the broader space of promoting entrepreneurship in emerging markets. And so there are many other groups that care about that as well, and some of them are members. We have probably 6 or 7 different groups with whom we sort of split or just do shared membership. So like the Global Impact Investing Network, the Global Social Entrepreneurship Network, the Latin American Venture Capital Association, the Emerging Market Private Equity Association, where we say, hey, great, let's work together. We'll be members of you, you be members of us, and we'll go to each other's events. So that's something that we do, which is relatively easy. With some of those, we also actually have joint membership deals where if you join both groups, you can get a discount because some organizations can't join every membership organization. And then beyond that, we do look for opportunities to collaborate on specific project work. I would say our longest one is with the Global Impact Investing Network, which has been promulgating and working with a broad set of stakeholders to develop IRIS, which is the Impact Reporting Investment Standards. That's it's kind of a set of, basically a dictionary of metrics that provides a tool for organizations to measure their impact. It doesn't say what you should measure, it just says once you've picked what you measure, hopefully it's in this dictionary of metrics, and you should use this particular definition. And we think that makes a lot of sense, and we've been promoting that and working closely with the GIN as one of their partners to help them develop that set of metrics, and then also to encourage our members to use them.
So how do you interact with what I would call the traditional donor community? USAID, DFID, CDUB, etc. They are interested in the social space. They're interested in impact investing. They're interested in entrepreneurship. Many of the things, or all of the things that you focus on. Do you receive funding from them? Do you partner with them? Do you work with them? How does that work?
Yes and yes. Basic level, many of the traditional donor agencies are members of Andy, and they, just like everyone else, pay dues to be part of us. So USAID, Global Affairs Canada, Inter-American Development Bank, IFC, to name a few. So we have that interaction. In the case of USAID, they have become in the past few years a significant funder of some research that we're doing, which I'm excited about, on accelerators and acceleration programs. There's been a proliferation of those around the world as a key tool in supporting entrepreneurs, and we don't really know if they work. So this research is academically rigorous research that we're doing with Emory University, funded by USAID and 3 private foundations, to explore whether or not accelerators work as a tool effectively to promote entrepreneurship. So we have that relationship with USAID. The IDB, the American Development Bank, has also been a funder of some of our research. And so I guess we have, in one sense, a traditional relationship, which is we've got some funding, and then I would say maybe a less traditional relationship, and that, they're members of a membership organization and are treated just like anybody else.
So as the executive director of Andy, what's the next 5 years look like? Do you have specific initiatives like this accelerator program we were talking about that you're pushing forward, or are there other initiatives you're working on or other partnerships or other things that you see that will continue to grow and evolve the organization?
Yeah, so a couple of things. From an internal perspective, what I hope the next 5 years looks like is that we continue to expand our regional chapters. As I mentioned, we have an emerging chapter in East and Southeast Asia. We want that to be formalized, a chapter in the Andean region, South America, based in Colombia. Right now, we have a chapter that's in Mexico and Central America. We would hope that those would split, and Mexico would be its own, and then we'd have Central America. So there's still lots of the world that we would like to be present in a more formal way so that we can be supportive of our members. And we think that's so important because, again, so much of the work, both the innovation work and the implementation work, happens when you are in the countries in which you want to work, and it's not happening in DuPont Circle or somewhere on Massachusetts Avenue here in D.C. And we recognize that. So we think that it's a tool to support our members and to support the broader mission of Andy to build out those chapters.
So really quick before you go on, most of the people listening to the show know that I'm sitting in Bangkok now. What's the process for setting up a chapter here? Do you just sort of go plant the flag and people show up, or do you have a criteria that you use, or how does that whole process work?
Yeah, so what has typically been the case, and the reason that we have the chapters in the places we do today, are that we have followed our member interest. And we make sure that there is that member interest because we require that we have at least 5 member organizations that are actively in a particular region to step up and say, we'll serve on a steering committee, as well as a member organization that is willing to host the Andy staff person, because we are trying not to be, at least, in the business of having to set up separate entities in each of these countries. So there's a fair amount of commitment that needs to be put forth by our members and partners before we go into a particular region. And that's the process that we're in East and Southeast Asia right now. The challenge there is that it's, as you know, it's a pretty massive swath of territory with very different countries, with different cultures and different languages. And so we need to make sure that wherever we are able to be relevant to lots of different types of entities within that region. And indeed, Thailand is a likely place that we would base the chapter, given its reasonably good air connections and the interest in this space and promoting entrepreneurship. And we are, more than in the past, we're now saying, look, strategically for Andy, it's important to be in certain parts of the world. And if we have to get a little bit ahead of our present membership base and say, look, we're going to commit to certain places, we're now considering that. I think it's important that we are in East and Southeast Asia, and in particular Southeast Asia, in my opinion, given all of the interesting activities that are taking place in that part of the world and the growing number of members that we have that are active there.
So you've put out there finance. We've talked about that. You've talked about the talent gap and filling that. What are the other challenges that Andy is facing and are focused on looking at and helping to solve for the network?
Well, it just gets back to finance and to your question about where are the big players on this. Based upon our calculations of the OEC database, donor support for small and medium enterprises broadly, and then entrepreneurship specifically, the money that's been flowing into this space has actually been declining over the past 5 years.
That's a rare trend. I would think just the opposite. That's amazing.
I part of this, I will admit, is that we need to get better data. For entrepreneurship, we actually have to do a word search across the OECD database in order to find programs that mention it. It is not today like a checkbox where the donors fill out the purpose of the program. Entrepreneurship is not one of the options. So we are working on that. Nevertheless, so let's assert and accept that the data is not perfect. For SME that is easier to track, and the numbers continue to go down. So I know when I'm looking at the most recent year data we have of 2014, where SME-related total donor disbursements was only 0.68%, 0.7% of total donor activity that's tracked by the OECD, and entrepreneurship was just 0.1%.
Wow, I mean, I'm honestly surprised, because that it just flies in the face of all the rhetoric that funders bring. We could go through all the buzzwords and whatnot, but I mean, I'm honestly taken aback that is the case.
I am honestly surprised and honestly discouraged. So, part of our role is to try to continue to advocate for entrepreneurship being a more utilized tool. And that does mean more financial flows coming from the traditional community. It also means trying to make the case for why it is important and in providing data to those who don't believe in this particular tool. And so we have a whole website called ysgbs.org, which provides the best data that we can find about how entrepreneurship and small and growing businesses can have a positive economic and social and environmental impact. We're right now in the process of identifying examples of SGBs for each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and talk about how entrepreneurs and small and growing businesses can be a relevant part of the solution to trying to hit each of those goals. And so we think we have a lot of work to do, and we think that we've got a broad tool of entrepreneurship that needs greater promotion, and that unfortunately, as you said, the talk has not been met with the resources yet. And so we want to address that.
I always end my interviews with two specific questions, and the first one is, who do you pay attention to? Blogs that you read, magazines that you read, conferences you go to, etc. That you think are important, that you go to for your information to make sure you're fresh, make sure you're up with the latest information about what's important to Andy.
Yeah, there definitely are. I'll start by selfishly promoting Andy, in that we have a team here that tries to go out and get access to all of the reports that are being written about social entrepreneurship, impact investing, corporate venturing, various sector reports, and how to promote agriculture and value-added agriculture. So we have a really good website, and if I had more time, I would just spend my days looking at all the reports that get put there. So we are a good aggregator and occasionally creator of new knowledge that is relevant to the space. But beyond that, I am a big reader of the Stanford Social Innovation Review. It is the one magazine that I read cover to cover when it comes out. I think it does a great job of tracking trends in this space, and it's really helpful. Impact Alpha is a blog that I check out. Next Billion is also another blog and sort of aggregation site that I use. And then I do like to actually sometimes read real actual books. Occasionally, I was fortunate enough to get a pre-release copy of Capital and the Common Good by Georgia, maybe mispronouncing, I was saying Keohane, who's at the Pershing Square Foundation now. Been reading that, and it's been really fascinating on some innovative financial tools that I think could be helpful. So when I get the time, I'll actually, and I'll read it in paper, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can tell you're old school. I agree wholeheartedly. I love a good book. The last question I have is what, or is there an innovation, a tool, a process, a thing that is outside your purview as the executive director of Andy, which you probably get to see tons and tons of great ideas all the time, but something that you think is super ultra cool that you like to geek out on that you wouldn't think the rest of the world needs to know about?
Well, my first answer is I'm a big fan right now of Google Flights, which I think is has become my favorite airline reservation and airline search engine. I do a lot of flying, and so I do geek out on those things. I do think that's something to commend to folks. And beyond that, in terms of like technology tools or things that really get me going, I will just say that, I guess here's a pitch. Like we have the Salesforce, and I'm just amazed at how much our life has been made better by being able to effectively track the communications that we have with our members. There are now thousands of people who are in our database, from the 262 members that Andy has, and trying to track our conversations to make sure that we know what we're doing with each member and make sure that we are ideally proactively making connections between members that have similar interests. We obviously needed a technology tool to do that. And so Salesforce, and we have something called Your Membership, which we've added on to that, has really been helpful. And I'm not the person that manages this technology. I just get to be the beneficial user of it, and it's been really helpful.
Randall, thank you so much for being a guest on the show today. It's been a fascinating conversation, and one I'm sure that our listeners will take a lot of value away from.
Stephen, my pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity, and look forward to having a chance to talk to you again.
You've been listening to the Terms of Reference podcast from Aidpreneur.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes.